Welcome to Emancipate Humanity with Bob Avakian, a podcast presented by the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. My name is Sansara Taylor, and I'll be one of the hosts for this new podcast series featuring the voice and work of Bob Avakian. Bob Avakian, B.A., is a revolutionary. He came out of the free speech movement in Berkeley in the 1960s, then worked with the early Black Panther Party, and then went on to become a revolutionary communist. Over the decades since, he has worked to develop a whole new framework of human emancipation, the new communism. Some of what you will hear in this series of podcasts will be short, biting commentary, others deep exploration and answers to burning questions. You will be provoked, challenged, and struggled with to think and to rethink, to shed illusions. You will laugh and be moved by BA's passion for the people and his refusal to accept all the unnecessary suffering here and all over the world. All of this has one aim and one aim only, to enable all of us to be part of a great struggle for an actual revolution to emancipate all humanity. This is our invitation to you to experience Bob Avakian. Today's episode of Emancipating Humanity with Bob Avakian features 3 pieces published on the website revcom.us in June and recorded in July 2020, the theme of which is captured by the title of the first piece we will hear. Radical change is coming. Will it be emancipating or enslaving? Revolutionary or reactionary? The 3 pieces we will hear speak to the situation we face, which is increasingly coming to a head in relation to the 2020 elections, with the stakes nothing less than the future of humanity. So as I mentioned, the first piece we will hear is Radical Change is Coming. Will it be emancipating or enslaving? Revolutionary or reactionary? The next piece digs deeper into critical implications of radical changes coming, with a serious title and theme, Bob Avakian on Civil War and Revolution. Last in this episode is a short piece that speaks to a phenomenon among commentators in the media that has been unfolding through late spring and early summer of 2020. Oh, now they're saying it's fascism. With that, let's get right to Bob Avakian.
Radical change is coming. Will it be emancipating or enslaving? Revolutionary or reactionary? For those who cannot help but hunger for a return to some kind of normalcy as an answer to the madness of Trump, Pence, and the rest, forget it. It is not going to happen. And nobody should want a return to the normalcy of this system. The normalcy of this system has always included the barbaric oppression of black people and other people of color, with systematic terror, brutality, and murder to enforce this oppression. It has always included vicious discrimination, bigotry, and violence against immigrants, women, LGBTQ people, and any others regarded as inferior and alien. It has always included unjust wars for empire and continuing crimes against humanity. It now poses a threat to the very existence of humanity through its increasing devastation of the environment and the ever-present threat of nuclear war. The outpouring of protest in response to the cruel, sickening murder of George Floyd, yet another link in the seemingly endless chain of murders of black people and other oppressed people by police, acting with a smug sense of impunity, without fear of punishment. This powerful outpouring of outrage, bringing together not only black people, but others of all races and genders and from all parts of the world, has begun to change the whole political landscape and culture, seizing the initiative in a very positive way from the ruling Trump-Pence regime and its fascist base, and challenging the whole paralyzing notion that the brutal reality of this system and its norms is the only possible reality, and everyone just has to find their place within this and do for self as best as possible. Faced with this rapidly changing situation, Trump has reacted with predictable threats, bullying, and intensified repression, while others, who represent the same system, but feel it is important at times like this to harness, pacify, and domesticate the outrage, speak once again in terms of meaningless reforms, and advocate a supposedly softer but still vicious version of the law and order which oppresses masses of people and represses any who dare to stand up against this oppression. Recognizing that it is likely to further inflame things, to simply call for a return to the way things were before this outpouring of righteous rebellion broke through the suffocating routine of life under this system, there are voices representing a section of the ruling class, such as CNN's Chris Cuomo, who are now speaking of the need for a new normal that will supposedly be more just. But there is no normal of this system that does not involve systematic injustice, continuing outrage and horror for people here and all over the world. And the fascist Trump-Pence regime, which now controls key levers of power and has called forth and cohered a mass base of fanatical followers, will accept no new normal except one that carries the monstrous oppression of this system to even more barbaric extremes. If anyone is looking to the scheduled election in November as a way to solve things painlessly and without turmoil and upheaval, first of all, it is not even certain that this election will actually be held. There is a definite possibility that Trump will find a way to postpone it, seizing on the continuing coronavirus crisis and/or some other pretext. Yes, using COVID-19 as an excuse for canceling the election would be hypocritical, given the reckless way the Trump-Pence regime has approached this from the beginning. But who should be surprised by hypocrisy on their part? Even if the election is held, there is a real chance that Trump could legitimately win, given the character of the opposition from Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. And anyway, Trump is already preparing the ground to say the election was rigged if he is not declared the winner. Remember how, before the last election, he refused to say he would abide by the results if he lost? Now he is proclaiming that in Michigan and some other states, preparations for people to vote by mail is massive fraud, when in fact this is not only legal, but highly sensible in the conditions of the coronavirus. At the same time, Trump and the Republican Party are making other moves to suppress votes, especially of people very likely to vote against them. And all this will almost certainly go on in an even bigger way as the time for the election approaches. Further, if the election is held and Trump is not declared the winner, but refuses to accept the results and insists he is still president, what about all those fascist followers of Trump, some of whom are already parading around with weapons and threatening people, including elected officials? What do you think they will do if Trump calls fraud and calls on them to rally to his support? Remember how, during the 2016 campaign, Trump threatened his opponent, Hillary Clinton, talking about what those Second Amendment people might do to her? Remember how Trump has openly talked about how he has lots of supporters among the police and the military and among bikers and other tough people? And then just recently, Trump has threatened to use the military to violently suppress protests against police brutality and murder. Even if the election takes place and Trump loses, and he is prevailed upon to accept the results, and his MAGA-hatted madmen and women do not rise up in arms in the short run, do you really think they are just going to go away or slink off passively, waiting for the next election? Whatever takes place in relation to the election scheduled for November, nothing good will happen, and really terrible things are bound to happen if those who cannot stand what is going on now with this regime, and the very real threat of far worse, do not find the ways, even in the conditions of COVID-19, to powerfully manifest that they are determined to drive this regime from power without waiting for and regardless of what goes on around the scheduled November election. Digging down even deeper, the basic fact has to be faced that even while Trump may very well use extra-legal, that is, illegal means to remain in power, this fascist regime actually came to power in the first place not through a military takeover or some other violation of the principles and functioning of this great democracy, but through the normal workings of this system. And those normal workings will continue to wreak havoc in the world and on the masses of people in the world through destruction of the environment, wars, massive displacement and desperate migration of people, on top of the ongoing savage inequalities, crushing exploitation, and murderous oppression written into the DNA of this system and carried out by its brutal enforcers. Because of all this, in fundamental terms, this notion of a return to normalcy is an illusion that will be exploded by the nature and workings of the system of capitalism imperialism to which the masses of humanity are subjected. For some time now, in speaking to the conditions of women, I have been calling attention to the fact that with the changes in the U.S. and the world economy, the whole question of the position and role of women in society is more and more acutely posing itself in today's extreme circumstances. This is a powder keg in the U.S. today. And it is not conceivable that all this will find any resolution other than in the most radical terms and through extremely violent means. The question yet to be determined is, will it be a radical reactionary or a radical revolutionary resolution? Will it mean the reinforcing of the chains of enslavement or the shattering of the most decisive links in those chains and the opening up of the possibility of realizing the complete elimination of all forms of such enslavement? This is true not only with regard to women, as important as that is, but for all those who are oppressed, degraded, and brutalized under this system. It is true not just for the U.S., but throughout this highly interconnected but terribly unequal world, dominated as it is by this system of capitalism imperialism. In the beautiful outpouring of determined resistance to institutionalized racism and police terror, marked by a growing sense that this is somehow bound up with the very nature of this system and the many other injustices it continually perpetrates, we can see the potential for the revolution that can shatter those chains of oppression and open the way to a radically different and far better world on an entirely new foundation. What remains to be done is to develop that potential into reality, bringing forward greater and greater numbers of people through this present upsurge sparked by the murder of George Floyd, and through many diverse spheres of life and many different streams of struggle, who are fired with a determination to put an end to all oppression, and are gaining the scientific understanding that this system of capitalism imperialism is the source of all these interconnected horrors, and are driven by the need and inspired by the possibility of bringing this system down and bringing that far better world into being.
That was Radical Change is Coming. Will it be emancipating or enslaving? Revolutionary or reactionary? Next up is Bob Avakian on Civil War and Revolution.
On Civil War and Revolution, I began the article Radical Change is Coming with this blunt statement. For those who cannot help but hunger for a return to some kind of normalcy as an answer to the madness of Trump, Pence, and the rest, forget it. It is not going to happen. I went on to speak to ways in which the fascist forces aligned with Trump and Pence are preparing to react, quite possibly with violence, if the election does not go Trump's way, or if Trump cancels the election and there is an outpouring of resistance to this. In fact, for more than 20 years now, I have been analyzing the fascist nature of the kind of forces that have rallied around Trump and how they have been increasingly talking about and preparing for a civil war. This is obviously a very serious question, but something even more serious is reflected in a statement I read somewhere recently, that if only one side, the fascist side, is waging a civil war, then it is not really a civil war, but murder and genocide. This is another way of saying what was crudely expressed by the fascist congressman from Iowa, Steve King, who declared, "Folks keep talking about another civil war. One side has about 8 trillion bullets, while the other side doesn't know which bathroom to use." Recently, powerful figures within the Republican Party have turned against King, feeling that his expression of this and other fascist positions is a little too crude, and King has been defeated in his bid for re-election in a Republican primary election. But expressed more or less crudely, King's fascist views and stands are shared by the core of the Republican Party and its base. And as I have pointed out previously, there is a demented insight in the comment by King quoted here. While the people King is ridiculing are righteously supporting the rights of trans people, gays, women, and others, at the same time, far too many are attempting to resolve the conflict with what is represented by the Trump-Pence regime and its fascist base with its 8 trillion bullets through relying on or seeking a return to what have been the norms of the bourgeois order in this country. And, on the part of some, this involves a call for restoring civility, while the fascists are determined to trample on and tear up these norms, and are perfectly happy to have those who oppose them adopt the stance of civility, accommodation, toward their unrelenting fascist offensive. And so, while things could be heading toward a civil war, and it could come down to that even in the not-too-distant future, the present lineup is very unfavorable for anybody who represents anything decent in the world. And here is another big part of the picture. While a lot of what King describes applies in a certain demented way, particularly to progressive or so-called woke middle-class people, there is another kind of problem with regard to more basic oppressed people, and in particular the youth, a big problem that their guns are now aimed at each other. And without going more fully into this right now, this is something that needs to be radically transformed in building a movement for an actual revolution. This whole situation needs to be radically transformed, and with a very definite urgency. We have once again seen the potential for this in the recent determined actions of masses of people whose outrage at the ongoing police murders of black men and women erupted in response to the cold-blooded execution of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And a strategically favorable element in this outpouring of outrage is that at the same time as it has involved significant numbers of black people, it has also involved large number of people of other races, including a great many white people, especially youth. And as I said in Why We Need an Actual Revolution and How We Can Really Make Revolution, upsurges like this exert a very powerful positive force and influence and show the potential for revolution. And it is crucial that the righteous resistance and rebellion of masses of people be transformed into revolutionary understanding, determination, and organization. Looking at this from the strategic standpoint of working for the revolution that is needed to deal with the root causes of all this, it is also important to act on this understanding. To a significant degree now, the conflict between the sections of society upholding this fascism and those opposing it from various different perspectives is shaping the terrain on which the struggle for revolution must be carried out. This conflict is likely to intensify and could erupt further in violent confrontation. And in any case, it would be a significant factor in the context of an all-out struggle between revolution and counter-revolution. It is not time right now for the all-out fight between revolution and counter-revolution. The conditions for this, most of all, a revolutionary people in the millions in a situation of deep crisis for the whole system, have not yet been brought into being. But there is a pressing need to work to accelerate and hasten the development of things toward a revolutionary situation. A big part of working to bring that revolutionary situation into being at the earliest possible time is waging a determined battle against the injustices and outrages continually perpetrated by this system. And this political battle also needs to be waged in bold and determined opposition to the base that is being mobilized by the fascist section of the ruling class. This is important in its own right now, and is important preparation for, and will have an important bearing on, the civil war between two sections of the people, once conditions have fully ripened and the all-out struggle is underway. For when it comes down to it, the all-out struggle will not just mean going up against the institutional forces of the old ruling class, but will also involve a civil war between two sections of the people, requiring the revolution to both defeat and disintegrate, but also, as far as possible, win over parts of the armed forces among the population that started out on the other side. With regard to winning over parts of the armed forces among the population that started out on the other side, first and fundamentally, the advance of the revolution in the actual fight would have a very powerful positive impact and effect on the thinking of people broadly. Along with that, there would be the powerful moral clarity and authority of the revolutionary forces fighting with right on their side, and in ways consistent with the emancipatory goals of the revolution. And then there are specific measures, such as the cancellation of all debt that people have owed to banks and other financial institutions in the old society, that the revolutionary forces would make known as their official policy. Such policies would be in line with and flow from the basic goals of the revolution and the radically new society the revolution is aiming to bring into being. And making such policies known and actually implementing them wherever and as soon as the basis exists to do that could play an important part in winning sections of society which started out on the counter-revolutionary side to actual involvement in or support for, or at least friendly neutrality toward, the revolution. Still, it will be the case that certain die-hard reactionary elements of the population, including many among hardcore fascist forces, will remain stubbornly committed to the counter-revolution, and the revolutionary forces would need to take this into account as part of their overall strategic approach and operational principles in waging the all-out fight once the conditions for that had been brought into being. A one-sided civil war, waged only by the forces of fascism against everything and everyone they hate and are determined to wipe out or beat into submission, would be a disaster, ignoring the reality that these fascists are definitely prepared to carry out such a civil war if they see it as necessary to achieve their objectives, will only make such a disaster more likely. And nothing good will come from relying on those, like the leaders of the Democratic Party, who refuse to call out this fascism for what it is and oppose it on that basis, because doing so would call into question the legitimacy of their whole system, which has given rise to this fascism. What is urgently needed is a massive struggle against this fascism of the Trump-Pence regime and determined opposition to the base it is mobilizing in its support. This struggle needs to be waged in a serious way, in accordance with the actual stakes involved, not seeking or initiating violence, but also not cowed into submission by the actions of the fascists. And what is needed in working toward the fundamental solution to all this is to wage this anti-fascist struggle as part of accelerating, hastening the development of things toward the point where it will be possible to carry out the revolution, the all-out fight to finally put an end to this whole system of capitalism imperialism, with all of the horrors it has already brought about for the masses of humanity, and the even worse horrors it will unleash if it is allowed to continue, when all this is completely unnecessary and there is the basis and possibility for a radically different and far better world. Additional note: a very important question is what constitutes a revolutionary situation? What are decisive factors that go into the development and ripening of the possibility for actually succeeding with the revolution? I have spoken to this in a number of works, including the following from Bob Avakian Responds to Mark Rudd. An actual revolution requires two essential factors: a revolutionary situation and a revolutionary people in their millions. And these two factors are closely interconnected. A revolutionary situation involves not just a crisis in society in some general sense, but a situation where the system and its ruling powers are in a profound and acute crisis, and millions of people refuse to be ruled in the old way, and are willing and determined to put everything on the line to bring down this system and bring into being a new society and government. Key components and signs of a revolutionary crisis are that the violence used to enforce this system is seen by large parts of society for what it is: murderous and illegitimate, and that the conflicts among the ruling forces become really deep and sharp, and masses of people respond to this not by falling in behind one side or the other of the oppressive rulers, but by taking advantage of this situation to build up the forces for revolution. I have also characterized a revolutionary situation this way. What is a revolutionary situation? A deep crisis and sharpening conflicts in society and in the government and ruling circles, where they cannot find a way to resolve these conflicts in society and among their own ranks, which do not make things worse for them and call forth more resistance and further undermine people's belief in their right to rule and in the legitimacy of their use of force to maintain their rule. Programs of reforming the system are shown to be bankrupt, totally unable to deal with what more and more people recognize as profound dysfunction and intolerable injustice of the whole setup. Those in society, as well as among the ruling class, who are trying to enforce the existing system are on the political defensive, even if lashing out. Millions of people are actively seeking radical change, determined to fight for it, willing to put everything on the line to win it, and searching for a force to lead them in doing so. And a solid core of thousands is united around a leadership and organized vanguard force with the vision and method, strategy and plan, and deepening ties among masses of people to actually lead the fight to defeat and dismantle the violent repressive force of the existing system and its power structure, and to bring into being a new revolutionary system that can provide the means for people to radically transform society toward the goal of abolishing oppression and exploitation.
That was Bob Avakian on Civil War and Revolution. We want to close out this episode of Emancipating Humanity with Bob Avakian with this short piece. Oh, Now they're saying it's fascism.
Oh, now they're saying it's fascism. The late sportscaster Dick Enberg frequently used that phrase, oh, now they're saying, to cover up his mistakes. Here's an example. In a basketball game Enberg is broadcasting, someone makes a shot, but they are called for a traveling violation, so the shot doesn't count. Yet Enberg doesn't realize right away that the traveling call has been made and the shot doesn't count. And he goes on for a while raving about what a great shot it is before he finally realizes that the shot doesn't count. Then, instead of simply admitting his mistake, he says, oh, now they're saying the shot doesn't count, when that has been the case all along. I was reminded of this in seeing a number of recent articles and commentaries, including by more mainstream voices, where comparisons are being made between Trump and the Nazis, and the specter of fascism in this country is finally being discussed by such people. For years now, those of us who have been consistently pointing to the fascist nature and objectives of Trump and the whole Trump-Pence regime have been met not only with attacks from the base of this regime, but with ridicule and dismissal from many liberals who have accused us of using exaggeration, hype, and alarmism in the attempt to scare and manipulate people into following us. Now, when what we have said about this is becoming increasingly obvious, to the point where more respectable sources are beginning to speak in these terms, a few honest people have readily acknowledged, you were right about this and I was wrong. But most of those who for some time have criticized or dismissed our analysis, but have now finally started to recognize, well, I guess this is fascism, have not had the decency and integrity to acknowledge that we have been correct all along in calling this fascism, and instead they have done the, oh, now they're saying, routine. To be clear, the reason it is right and necessary for people to acknowledge that we have been right all along about this is not a matter of our egos, but a matter of principle and method. If we have been right about something as important as this, maybe there is something to learn from that. Not only the particular analysis we have made, but the method that underlies that analysis. The scientific method and approach of investigating reality and proceeding on the basis of the facts and evidence about the actual reality, following the truth where it leads, rather than proceeding according to preconceived notions and prejudices, and resisting uncomfortable conclusions. And this question also needs to be seriously engaged. Perhaps those of us who have applied this method and approach to understanding not only the nature of the Trump-Pence regime, but beyond that, the fundamental nature of the system we live under, are also correct in our conclusion that this system of capitalism, imperialism, has the most horrendous oppression, exploitation, and plunder of people and the environment built into its very foundation and its ongoing functioning. And therefore, as we have emphasized, this system cannot be reformed. It must be overthrown if there is to be a future worth living for humanity.
Go to the website revcom.us to find out more about Bob Avakian. You can also find there the written text of all three pieces we heard today. At revcom.us, you can access the full body of Bob Avakian's work, his essays, sharp, timely articles, the Constitution for a New Socialist Republic in North America that he authored, along with books, films, and audio. You can also find the full body of his work at the website, thebobavakianinstitute.org. We encourage you to watch our weekly YouTube program, the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show, which can be found at the YouTube channel, The RevComs, which also hosts this podcast, Emancipate Humanity with Bob Avakian. Find us on social media at The RevComs and become a subscriber to our channel for updates and special conversations.